So this is the iPhone 7. What was originally a pretty controversial release back in September 2017 actually ended up being the first iPhone review I ever did on this channel. However, that was almost 2 years ago, so today I decided to take a look back on this iPhone 7 and find out whether or not it's worth your money in 2021. First of all, as always, we're going to be taking a look at the specs. The iPhone 7 features the Apple A10 processor, 2GB of RAM, either 32, 128, or on some special editions, 256GB of internal storage. Me personally, I've never struggled to get by on 32GB. However, I barely have anything on my phone as it is. So yeah, make sure to buy the appropriate amount of storage that you actually need. It also weighs in at 138 grams, which is actually pretty light, especially considering how heavy some newer models have got. But of course, a lot of this is going to be down to building materials and of course the size of this 4.7-inch screen phone. As always, the screen and battery life do get their own separate sections later on, but for raw specs, that's pretty much it. Now, usually I don't tend to focus too much on specs in my iPhone reviews. I mean, a lot of the optimization is actually down to iOS, so historically, I've never found specs to be all that important. However, it is worth noting that 2GB of RAM certainly isn't very much, and if you go with the lowest option of storage, which would be 32GB, if you like playing a lot of games, then this might be an issue for you. Up next, we have the build quality. Now, this was actually the first iPhone I ever primarily owned, and a lot of that was down to the build quality. So, why did I choose this phone in particular? Well, the rear and the sides of the iPhone 7 are made out of 7000 series aluminium, which basically means that it's super durable, but doesn't make the phone feel cheap. As someone who is super uncoordinated and was actually very concerned about using a glassback phone, as my previous phone was the Samsung S8, and that ended up getting very broken, so I decided an aluminium phone would be a good fit for me. And of course, while I did eventually switch back to a glassback phone, throughout the time that I used this iPhone 7, the back has been absolutely fantastic. Now, don't get me wrong, because I have that matte black version, I did find that the paint does occasionally get a little bit scratched. For some reason, this actually only seems to be an issue with the black model, so do bear this in mind when you're choosing an iPhone color of your own. Yeah, make sure to watch out for that. Now, the screen is obviously glass, so do bear in mind that it is a breakpoint on this phone. I actually did end up breaking my iPhone 7 screen a while back. However, this was most likely due to a faulty screen protector, and I haven't had any issues since. But still, nevertheless, I would recommend a case if you are prone to dropping your phone, as I am. Another area of good build quality is the camera lens. Now, despite it being a protruding camera lens, I've never really had any real issues with it scratching, and whether this is due to the coating that Apple used or not, all I know is that it has worked great. The iPhone 7 also features an IP67 water resistance rating, meaning that it can survive in up to a meter of water for 30 minutes, and in the time that I've been using this phone, it has worked great. As always though, I would recommend avoiding getting your phone wet if you can. After all, this is more of a safeguard than something to rely on, but nonetheless, pretty nice to have. Overall, I'm still pretty impressed with the build quality of the iPhone 7, even in 2021. And as long as you keep a case on this thing to protect your screen, you should have no problems. In terms of the screen, how does that perform? Well, let's take a look. The iPhone 7 features a 4.7-inch screen with a resolution of 750 by 1334, with a peak brightness of 603 nits, and while this may not seem all that impressive, especially for 2020, to be honest, I haven't really found any issues with it. While it's certainly not the brightest, I have found it to be totally usable even on bright days, and while it does lack features like True Tone, which some of you may know is one of my favorite features of modern iPhones, it is still an enjoyable experience. It also features 3D touch, which to this day I still prefer over the more modern haptic touch technology that's on the newer iPhones. Seriously, there's just something awesome about being able to do a firmer press and unlocking that secondary interaction. Seriously, once you start using it, it'll be pretty difficult to go back. Overall, the screen is certainly an area where the iPhone 7's age starts to show a little bit. The lack of resolution and brightness may be an issue for some high-end users. However, for most people, I really don't think this is an issue. I mean, I've certainly had no trouble using it. Still though, if you want a really good screen, iPhone 7, probably not for you. But if you just want a screen that looks great and you can use in pretty much any lighting situation, the iPhone 7 does just fine. Up next, we're going to be talking about the button placement, including the main unlock method for this phone, which just happens to be Touch ID. Honestly, I've said it before and I'll say it again here, I think that the button layout on the iPhone 7 was probably one of the best we've ever seen from Apple. For one, they removed the volume button indent, creating two free freestanding volume buttons that are easy to press and nice and tactile. The lock button is isolated, and the mute switch, one of my favorite features about iPhones by the way, is of course on this phone, which is awesome. I've just found this design to overall make sense. I would say it's probably one of the most intuitive button layouts I could think of, with very few button combination actions unlike the iPhone X models, meaning less mispresses and of course no more accidental screenshots. The home button on this phone is a force touch home button, and while this does kind of make the phone look dated, I personally don't mind it. Unlocking the phone is as snappy as ever, and in this time of wearing masks, it does make unlocking your phone significantly easier than it is with Face ID. It's also great if you want to unlock your phone without looking at it, and if you prefer a Touch ID system, then the iPhone 7 is pretty much as good as you can get. The camera is also another area where the iPhone 7 starts to show its age a little bit, but all things considered, it actually works pretty well. I mean, sure, it's a step down from the dual camera system that I'm personally used to on my iPhone 12. However, I have found the sharpness to be at a good level with good dynamic range and of course plenty of saturation. I've taken many photos with the iPhone 7 in my time using it, and honestly, if you just want to take casual photos with one focal length, then the iPhone 7 will be totally fine and even enjoyable. That said though, there is obviously nothing like night mode. I mean, that wasn't even introduced till the iPhone 11, so low light will be limited at least compared to newer options, but as I said, in my time using this phone, I've still got by taking low light photos. Another thing that's missing is of course the portrait mode. To be honest, I actually miss this one a lot more than the night mode when using this phone. It's just nice to be able to take a photo with a really nice blurry background that has that blurry background that's typical of something like a full frame camera without lugging a full frame camera around. Overall though, I think for the average person who just wants to take a few snaps on holiday or for social media, the iPhone 7's camera will be totally fine for video, and I'd say flat out enjoyable in photo mode. And I mean, I should know, I've taken several Instagram photos with the iPhone 7 and no one has complained about the quality. I know the iPhone 7 camera does miss out on some of the latest tech, but still, it takes nice pictures, which is, at the end of the day, what's most important. The iPhone 7 can shoot 4K at up to 30 FPS, which again is a downgrade from what I'm used to, and I really do enjoy that 60 FPS because I'm able to slow it down to 24 FPS and get a really nice, smooth, semi-slow motion clip while still maintaining a fairly natural look. Dynamic range in the video mode certainly isn't as good as it is in the photo mode or on any new iPhones, but again, I still think for casual video, the 4K on the iPhone 7 is pretty darn good, especially considering the age. The iPhone 7 also does shoot slow motion, 1080p at 120 FPS and 240 FPS in 720p. Honestly, while it is good to have this ultra smooth slow motion, if you want quality, I personally recommend just sticking to the 120p mode. There is a significant difference in quality, so if you do care about that over slowness, I would just recommend put it in the 120 mode and use that. However, if you do need that ultra slow motion, it is nice that it's still available. However, you are taking a noticeable performance drop. Honestly, I'd say that the iPhone 7 is significantly more dated in terms of video versus photo. It misses out on higher resolutions, higher frame rates, and of course, more dynamic range when compared to the photo mode. But as I said, for the casual user who just wants to capture some quick videos, the iPhone 7 is still totally fine. However, what about the front-facing camera? Well, this is a 7 megapixel f2.2 camera that will take selfies. To be honest, it's absolutely fine for that. I mean, what does anybody else use the front-facing camera for anyway? The front-facing camera also does do video, and this, in comparison to the new iPhones, is probably the thing that's furthest behind. It only does 1080p at 30 FPS, and to be honest, if you want to do some filming with the iPhone 7, I would personally recommend not using the front-facing camera. Simply take the rear camera, and if you need to film yourself, just flip it around and film yourself like that. Quality will be so much better. Up next, we have probably the most important aspect of any modern smartphone experience: the performance. Well, obviously it's an iPhone, so it's gonna be running iOS, and despite this phone being released back in 2016, it is still supported by Apple. The iPhone 7 I have here is running iOS 14 and it runs like a charm, which is pretty awesome to be honest. The operating system feels nice and smooth, stock apps work well, and I've had very few issues with the OS performance of this phone. In terms of third-party performance, I've still found the iPhone 7 to be pretty damn impressive considering its age. You can easily use this phone to consume media on apps like YouTube or Twitter, and it even runs some casual games well too. When it comes to the more intensive apps though, it's certainly not as good as the modern smartphone experience, but as I've said before, almost everything runs pretty well on the iPhone 7 considering its age. However, how long will this actually last? Well, the iPhone 7 was released in September 2016, and as iPhones typically get 5 years of iOS, I mean, technically the iPhone 6s has 6 versions at this point, and what this means is essentially that iOS 14 is the last version of iOS that the iPhone 7 is gonna get. Now, as I said, officially, we don't know if the iPhone 7 is gonna get iOS 15 until it's released, but there is still a good chance that iOS 14 is the last version of iOS that the iPhone 7 gets, so it is important to carefully factor this in before you go and decide to buy an iPhone 7. Heading back to the hardware side of things, we're going to be talking about the speakers. The iPhone 7 was actually the first iPhone to feature the stereo speaker mode, which utilizes both the top and the bottom speaker to create a more immersive sound experience when watching videos or listening to music on your phone. And I know, at first there were certainly some issues with the speakers being off balance, but I think that's pretty much entirely been sorted by software now, and I've got to say, works pretty nicely. If I were to describe the sound quality of the iPhone 7 speakers to you, it would be not very bassy, a little bit muddy, not too loud, but still good enough for some casual music listening or video watching, and yeah, not too bad. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about what's usually a pretty big con of older iPhones. The iPhone 7 has a 1960 mAh battery, which really isn't very big for 2021, and I have found that throughout my personal use of this phone, I was having to plug it in during the afternoon. However, someone who doesn't have to plug their phone in during the afternoon is my mum, who also uses an iPhone 7, and she can easily go throughout her day totally fine. Honestly, she's very much more of an average phone user than I am. She uses her phone for texting, occasionally watching videos, and social media. So if this sounds like you, chances are you've got nothing to be concerned about. However, if you use your phone more like me, then I'd recommend either carrying a charger or any other means to charge your phone when you're on the go, if you're planning to be out more than, I don't know, 5 hours. Alright, so all these things considered, do I recommend buying the iPhone 7 in 2021? Well, if you're someone like me who loves the latest tech, probably not. But I do still think there is a place for the iPhone 7 in 2021, specifically for either an introduction to the iOS operating system as it was for me, or as a casual use iPhone. If you want a phone that's built well, runs smoothly, and can take some nice pictures without breaking the bank, then the iPhone 7 is certainly a viable option in 2021. Alright guys, so that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know, by the way, have you ever owned an iPhone 7? Do you plan to buy an iPhone 7? Always like reading your comments. As for now though, as always, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video. If you want to see more content like this, then smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.